Welcome, everyone. While we all pile in here for this amazing holiday session of our advanced class, let us know where you're joining from in the chat section. I've got that up on my screen here, and excited to see where you guys are joining from. Oh, that's to host and panelists. But excited to have you guys. Got some really cool stuff for you lined up today. Of course, we still have some extremely useful calculators for today's market. You know, any of those buyers and sellers that you're talking with this week, I know it's a little lighter, but if you are having conversations with people, we've got some really cool calculators tailored to today's market dynamics. So excited to be showing you guys some of those useful calculators that you can weave into your conversations today, those holiday events that you're going to, gatherings with your family, some really powerful conversations that you can have with your clients and your family about all things real estate. We want to keep you guys on top of all things that are important to be talking about with our clients. Now, also in our advanced class, for those of you who have joined before, you know, we also like to talk about the monthly marketing package. Well, we pushed out a really cool monthly marketing package for December, and some of the content, these holiday filters, are extremely timely. Right now is the perfect time for you to, you know, take photos and record videos with those fun real estate themed frames. And so a lot of cool stuff in the monthly marketing package that we'll be talking about today as well. Yes, this is, Susan, a live training where we'll be talking about some of those calculators. In fact, to answer Susan's question, let's go ahead and pull the app up. I'm going to go ahead and dive into some of these calculators with you. Now, I know that a lot of you already joined our basics call, and this is the part 2. This is the advanced call. If you haven't had the chance to join our basics call, make sure to touch base with your rep. They can, you know, get you a link to join that advanced call where we talk about some of the basic tools in our app. I'm going to go ahead and open up PalmAgent again. As you guys know, your numbers may be a little different. I'm using an unbranded version here in Dallas, and so my numbers might be a little different than yours, but as you guys use your branded versions, we have all the fees and such built in based on us working with your title partner. So the numbers may be a little different, but again, if you joined us for the basics call, you already know how to use your app to run those buyer estimates when you're out there house shopping with those buyers. Just being able to plug in a home price, hit compute, and tell that buyer what's that monthly payment and what are they going to need to bring to the closing table. Of course, you also learned how to use that seller tab with the world's fastest net sheet. Again, I don't say that lightly. We actually submitted a video to the Guinness Book of World Records to claim that title. You can create and email off a great looking net sheet, you guys, in under 30 seconds. Again, something that we covered in our basics call. But today, for the advanced call, we're going to be diving deeper into some of these calculators in that calculators tab. Like I have said on that basics call, we've got 28 in total for you guys. A lot of really amazing tools here. But we're going to be talking about 3 calculators that you can weave into your conversations today that are geared towards the dynamics that today's market brings. And so let's talk about the dynamics that we have in today's real estate market. So first, I'll start with the buyer side. You know, when you're meeting with these buyers, the common thread that we're seeing across the nation is that some of these buyers are hesitant. They're thinking about waiting. You know, they hear the Fed's going to cut the rates. Rates are going to come down in the next few months. And so I'm not going to buy now. I'm going to buy in a couple months, 6 months, a year. And I'm going to buy at a lower rate. But what those buyers forget is, you know, waiting to buy, you know, homes appreciate. That home that you're looking at right now, it could be more expensive next year. And of course, if there are lower rates next year, that's when all the buyers start fighting over homes and it shoots home prices up even further. But if there are lower rates next year, I'd rather get the home for the right price today and then refinance down to that lower rate or do one of those rate redos that a lot of the lenders are talking about right now. And so, you know, the important thing to show our buyers buyers is that there's a lot of opportunity for them in today's market. A lot of these homes are sitting on the market for a little bit longer. There's not as much buyer demand right now in this holiday season, so there's opportunity for our buyers today rather than waiting for that low rate in 6 months' time. And the interesting aspect about today's market is that in today's market, those sellers are still having a tough time selling their homes. And so as a buyer, I have opportunity today to get a concession from them and to do a buy down, a temporary buy down, a permanent buy down. It doesn't matter. I have the opportunity to do a buy down today and buy down my rate rather than waiting for lower rates in 6 months' time, a year's time, who knows? And then also possibly having to pay more for the home at that point. And so there's an opportunity for our buyers today to get the home for the right price, get a concession from that seller, and buy down our rate in today's market. So that's our first calculator that I want to go over with you guys, that buy down calculator. As you can see, it's got that new badge on there. That's one of our new ones. And it's, again, very timely for today's market. And the beauty about a buy down is, yes, it is a lender conversation. We all know that. The lender's going to handle the final numbers in the buy down, especially if it's a permanent buy down. Those temporary ones, the money gets held in an escrow account, all that. But for the buy downs in general, the lender's going to handle that. So, why do we as agents need to even be able to talk about buy downs with our clients? Well, that's when your expertise comes into play, you guys. A lot of these buyers, they don't know what a buy down is. This is maybe the first time that they're ever buying a home, possibly their second or third, and they've never come across a buy down. They've never had to utilize a buy down. And so this is your opportunity to show some expertise and teach them about a tool that can be extremely helpful in their purchase. And of course, you want to have a lender that you work closely with that you can connect that buyer with. But if you can start the conversation about buy downs and how there's opportunity for those buyers, you might be able to recharge some of that buyer action that you need. You might be able to re-engage some of those buyers who were a little hesitant but wanted to pull the trigger right now. A buy down could be that tool that helps you get that deal across the finish line. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you our buy down calculator. Now, before we dive into that, I do want to mention, for those of you that are joining us that are curious about permanent buy downs, I do want to point out, if you go to your buyer calculator and if you click on that interest rate, I got to plug in a price point. I'll plug in 5.25. But if you click on that interest rate, there's going to be a settings gear on that interest rate input field. And if I press that, this is going to let me build a buy down, a permanent buy down right into my buyer estimate. So for those of you that are out there using your buyer estimate already that you learned about on that basics call, but you're trying to implement this permanent buy down in here you can put in 3 discount points. That's going to bring their rate down to a 5.5, and who's going to pay it? And we can build that right into your calculation for your estimate. So I did want to take a quick detour and mention that we do have this permanent buy down feature built right into your buyer estimate with the settings gear that shows up on that input field. So I wanted to quickly detour and mention that, but let's jump back to our calculators tab and dive into this buy down calculator, the dedicated buy down calculator we've created for you. So we open it up, and the most important piece here for us to choose is what type of buy down to do. Now, the 2-to-1 buy downs are extremely popular, but you can hit that drop down arrow next to where it says buy down type. And you can see that you can do a 1-0. You can do a 2-to-1. You can do a 3-to-1. We even let you do a permanent buy down where it calculates the discount points and the cost of those and all that. But since those temporary buy downs are so trendy right now, so popular, I'm going to go ahead and stick with a 2-to-1 buy down. The cost of these buy downs is also very reasonable. So if we have our buyers who are trying to get a concession from that seller, the cost of a 2-to-1 buy down isn't that much. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and plug in a list price here. Let's say we're working with our buyer and they're looking at a 5.25 home. I plug that in and I hit done. It's going to calculate how much that buy down costs. That 2-to-1 buy down, how much would it cost? It's $10,600 right here, you guys. That's how much it would cost to do a 2-to-1 buy down on this 5.25 home. And of course we can choose, if there's a seller loan balance that plays a part in if you're going to be explaining why this buy down makes sense for your seller. But let's just say we're using this with a buyer. So I'm going to, not input it in a seller loan balance because that really doesn't matter to our buyer. There's also, of course, assumptions that we can do here. 30-year, the taxes based on my area, hazard insurance, closing date, all of that is baked in for you. I'm not going to adjust those, but I wanted to point out that you can adjust those assumptions. All I've done, you guys, I've chosen a 2-to-1 buy down. I've plugged in 5.25 as my price point, and I'm going to hit that compute button down there at the bottom, and look what it's going to do. It's going to give me a nice detailed result screen here that makes it so much more easy, so much easier for me to explain to my buyer what even a temporary buy down is. What is this 2-to-1 buy down that they've heard about on social media? And so, we can look at the results down here and you can see that it's going to show a standard scenario on the left there. A standard purchase, a 30-year fixed, you get that 6.25 rate. So your monthly payment through the 30 years is going to be $45.74. That's the standard purchase. Now let's compare that to a 2-to-1 buy down here. So you can see the 2-to-1 buy down is labeled with year 1, year 2, and years 3 through 30. Those 3 columns make up this 2-to-1 buy down here. And so here we can see that we're dropping that interest rate 2 percentage points that first year. Instead of 6.25, that buyer's getting a 4.25 interest rate. So they're saving about $585 a month that first year. That $39.89 monthly payment definitely feels a lot better for them than that $4,500 monthly payment. So in that first year, every single month, they're getting $585 in savings that first year. That second year, they're still getting $300 in savings. Instead of that $4,500 monthly payment, they're only getting a $4,274 monthly payment. And then years 3 through 30, we're back up to the normal rate, back up to the normal monthly payment. So this is a way for our buyer to get that $10,600 worth of savings in the first 2 years of the loan. A lot of times I like to tell a buyer, hey, instead of offering 10,000 below list, where you're spreading that $10,000 discount out over the full 30 years of the loan, and you probably only live in the house for 8 to 12 years. Instead, let's get you that $10,000 discount in the first 2 years when you're actually going to be in the home paying that mortgage. Let me get you some of the savings in the years that matter. And that's such an important conversation for us to have with our buyer is, how long do you plan on living in the home? If you're not going to live in it for the full 30 years, then why are you taking a discount on the full 30 years? Let's get that discount, in the first couple of years. You're only going to be living in the house 5, 8, 10 years. Let's get you the discount while you're in the home. And this result screen is so great because we can look at other temporary buy down options. Let's look at a 1.0, where they drop that interest rate just 1 percentage point the first year, and then years 2 through 30, they're back up to that normal rate. Or on the other side of the spectrum, a 3-2-1, where they're dropping that interest rate that first year 3 percentage points, you guys. They could get a 3.25 rate today for the whole next year. For this whole first year of their loan, they could get that 3.25 rate that they've been wanting. A lot of these buyers waiting for those threes, rates in the threes, the sub threes that we saw in 2022. With a 3-2-1 buy down, you could actually have a rate in the threes for your first year. Such an amazing product here. And of course, this one, the 3-2-1, does cost a little bit more. That's what I was mentioning earlier. The 2-to-1 buy down's a little bit more reasonable. You can see that a 3-2-1 actually would cost us about $20,000. So we'd have to get a larger concession from that seller to make this happen, but it's something that we can talk about with our buyer, have that back and forth with them, educate them on a tool that's available to them in today's market. Who's to say when the Fed cuts the rates in 6 months that you'll even be able to get a concession from that seller? But in today's market, you can get a concession from that seller, use that in one of these buy downs. So I absolutely love this. But I want to circle back to that point I made earlier about taking that $10,000 discount in the first 2 years versus spreading it out over the full 30 years. Because this is an interesting conversation for us to have with our buyers, especially these buyers who are worried about affordability and they're looking at homes maybe outside of their price range, and they're thinking about submitting these lower offers. And so it becomes a conversation with that buyer is, hey, should we offer them 10,000 below list? Or should we offer them that 5.25 that they want and we ask for a $10,000 concession and then we do that concession for this 2-to-1 buy down? That's a really, really powerful conversation for us as a buyer's agent to have with our buyer. And so let's take a look at how the numbers shake out. At the top of your screen, I want to point out the compare tab. If I click on that compare tab here, it's going to give me a look at both scenarios here. A price reduction, that seller accepting that offer 10,000 below list on the left side. If we were to do that, if we were to submit an offer of 515 on this home, and submit that offer below list and they accept it, we're going to save about $93 a month. That's how much we'll save. Now, mind you, it is going to be for the full 30 years, but that's the number of savings that we need to look at. $93 a month. That's how much we're saving our buyer. Now let's look at the other side. Instead of offering 515, 10,000 below, what if we offer them the 5.25 and we ask for that $10,000 concession and we use that concession to do a buy down, a 2-to-1 buy down? Look at that savings. Yearly savings for the first year, we're saving that buyer $585 a month, you guys. That second year, still $300 a month that they're saving. These are the type of numbers that really actually speak to that affordability crisis that those buyers are feeling. A lot of that tension that they're feeling about affordability, these are numbers that actually move the needle for them, as opposed to $93 a month in savings that they're getting by offering, 10,000 below ask. So such a relevant conversation for us to have with our buyers in today's market, again, because we can get these concessions right now. And who's to say if we're able to get those concessions in 6 months' time? So really powerful and relevant conversation for you guys to have through the holiday. In these different opportunities, you guys are going to different events for your brokerage, family gatherings. This is a type of conversation that you can have with somebody who's a little bit shy about buying. They want to buy. They don't know if now's the right time. They're thinking about waiting for lower rates. This is a type of conversation that you can have with them, really flex your expertise and get them to consider buying now before opportunity changes for them in the coming months. So absolutely had to check this out. Hey, so I see, Himani, that you had a question about the recordings. You can actually absolutely reach out to us. You can just reach out to us at support@palmagent.com, and we'll be able to get you over recordings of the basics call so you can join that, and we'll put you in the direction of other training resources that are available to you. So thank you for asking. All right, so that's the buyer side and such a relevant calculator for us to use with our buyers in today's market. But let's talk about the other side, you guys. Let's talk about sellers. These sellers that we're dealing with, that we're fighting with. I know a lot of you guys are going into these listing appointments and, you know what? Alden has a question. Let's see real quick, even though we were talking about 2-to-1 strategy. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to jump back into that because Alden brings up a good point. This is another thing I wanted to point out about that conversation with our buyers. So, 10-6 for that 2-to-1 buy down. You can absolutely use this information with your sellers as well. So I'll jump over to that compare tab. If you're working with a seller and it's getting to that point where you're thinking about maybe we need to do a price reduction, maybe the house has been sitting on the market for 4, 5, 6 months. This is such a powerful conversation for you to have with that seller on an alternative to a price reduction. Instead of them reducing the price, which is going to look bad on the MLS, buyers are then going to start submitting those lowball offers. People are going to start thinking blood's in the water. They're having to do a reduction. What's wrong with the house? Instead of doing a reduction, offering a seller concession instead, that could be a good alternative to a price reduction. So glad that Alden brought that up. Thank you, brother. Good to see you in attendance for this one. But this is a really powerful calculation for you to use with your buyers, but also also with your sellers. Again, if you're in that awkward situation with that seller where you're coming to that point where you're about to have a meeting about possibly doing a price reduction, this could be the good alternative to a price reduction. Instead of reducing that price $10,000, let's keep the list price where it is. Let's keep, give another few months of trying to sell it at 5.25, but let's offer a concession now. So, such an important piece of this calculator is that it's valuable on both sides of the transaction, you guys. So that brings me to the seller side now. What's it like dealing with sellers across the nation? Well, what we found is that a lot of these sellers are still, aspirational or unrealistic. They still are living in 2022 and think that their house appreciated 20% over the last year. And that's just not the case. There's not enough buyer demand to support these prices that some of these sellers want to list the house at. And so, it's more important than ever before to be able to go into these listing appointments, these pricing conversations, and really look like a rock star and be able to talk about some of the things that seller's not thinking about when they're thinking about that aspirational price tag. They want to list the house for X and it won't sell in the neighborhood for that much. It's going to take a little while for us to sell it. We need to be able to have conversations with our sellers about, the cost of a home sitting and the cost of pricing a home too high. And that's where our two other calculators that I want to talk about with you guys today come into play. So first, there's the holding cost calculator. That's the first one that I'll start with you. It's the basic calculator. You need to be able to have a conversation with your sellers about how much the house is costing as it sits on the market. And then, once you can have that type of conversation, hopefully after I go through it with you here today, but after you're able to have that holding cost conversation with your sellers, then I'm going to show you that advanced calculator, true value analysis. It's our newest calculator and such a powerful tool for those pricing conversations. But it's kind of an advanced feature. You need to know how to have that basic conversation first with your sellers, that holding cost conversation. And so let's start with the holding cost calculator. The holding cost calculator is essentially, hey, how much does this house cost as it sits on the market because we price it too high? And that's a conversation that you guys need to be able to have with these sellers. In fact, if they're interviewing multiple listing agents, I urge you to ask them the question, hey, do you know how much your house is costing each month that it sits on the market? They need to know that number, especially with the average days on market getting longer and longer in some of these markets. A seller needs to have a realistic understanding of how much that house is going to cost them if they do price it too high and it sits for longer than it needs to. And so the holding cost calculator is such a powerful one because it talks about those costs and how quickly they add up over time. Because the basic costs that are included in holding costs are taxes, insurance, and interest. When you make your monthly payment, those are three things that you're just essentially throwing away. You're making your monthly payment and it includes principal. Principal is actually cutting down at your loan. But the taxes, insurance, and interest, that's just money that you're throwing away. You'd actually end up better if you just listed the house for less and it moved quicker so that you didn't throw away that tax, insurance, and interest amount over X amount of time. But that number is only exacerbated when you talk about the other things that homeowner is paying while that house sits, especially in the situations where they've bought the new house and they still have that old house in their ownership. That's when they're paying a lot of things that they're not thinking about. HOA, electricity, lawn care, pool maintenance, because they still want good curb appeal and they're trying to get top dollar. They're still trying to sell this house. And all those things are adding up over time. Again, they'd be better off listing the house for less and it moving quicker. And that's what this holding cost calculator lets you talk about is that cost. And so let's open it up. So I'll open up that holding cost calculator. And it lets me plug in a price point. I'll do 5.25. Now, for those of you who didn't join us on the basics call, you don't know about our home link feature, but you're going to know about it now. On any of these seller calculators, this holding cost is the calculator you use with the seller. If you plug in an address up there in the top left corner, it's going to pull some information for you. So I'm going to plug in an address here in Texas in Grapevine and watch what it pulls for me. First, it pulls taxes, which is great. This is what that homeowner paid in tax last year. So I'm going to press next. But the other thing that it searches for, you guys, is an open loan. I can see on this address there was a loan originated in 2021, which, by the way, the average rate for that year was 2.94. We show that in gray text below this input field. But I'm going to plug in that average rate of 2.9 for 2021, that glorious sub 3 rate. I'll leave it on there for a second because I know we're all hoping for that to come back, but I don't know if it will. But we'll hit compute, and there's how much that homeowner still owes on their mortgage, you guys. Now, this is an estimate, of course. What we do is we take that amortization, we take their origination, a date and an amount, and we run an amortization schedule. So if they've been regular on their payments on a 30-year fix, this is what they still owe today. So such a cool feature when we're out and about and that seller doesn't know off the top of their head how much they still owe. We can, pull that automatically just by adding their address. Or in the case of this calculator, I'm working this up on my way to that appointment with this seller. And so maybe I'm not there for them to tell me, or they're not here for them to tell me what their loan balance is, but I'm able to pull that automatically just by adding their address. So cool feature, home link that I wanted to mention. I'm going to go ahead and press use estimate, and that's going to load the taxes and loan balance into my input screen here for my holding cost calculator. Now, the most important part of this holding cost calculator are these monthly expenses. Now, we've got a really cool feature that we're working on where you'll actually be able to send a link to that homeowner and let them fill this out themselves. But in its current format, you've got to input all these. And I urge you to put in as many of them as you can. All those costs that homeowner's paying each month, we really want to show those so that we can really illustrate how much they're affecting their net as they build up. And so all the things that they're maybe paying, 300 in HOA, and you can of course plug in the numbers that work for your client. But I'll plug in that they've got that electricity bill. They're paying that gas bill, the internet, because, they've got security cameras and the security cameras need internet. So they're still paying internet on that home that they still have ownership of. The other things, the water bill, the trash bill, all these things that are adding up, you guys, each month. And even down to things like the lawn care, they're still paying the lawn team to come out. They're still paying the pool boy to come out because they're trying to keep this pool and the lawn looking nice because they're still trying to sell this house, you guys. And we want to add up all those things that they're paying. And then we hit compute. And here's what it's going to do. It's going to break down first the cost of each month, which this monthly expense, adding all those up, it's about $3,000 each month, $2,938 each month that's coming out of that homeowner's pocket as that house sits. Now, I mentioned it earlier. This is the number you need to be asking those sellers when you're interviewing them or when they're interviewing you. You want to ask them if they know this number because that $2,900 adds up really quick. A house this doesn't sell in just 1 month, you guys. As it takes a couple months, sometimes a little bit longer than that. Over 3 months, that's almost $9,000 coming out of their pocket. If that house sits on the market for 6 months, which is not unrealistic, you can go search Zillow. A lot of these houses are sitting on the market for that long at least. And if this specific house were to sit in the market for 6 months, we're talking about $17,000 coming out of your pocket. That's a big number. That's when the numbers start getting really interesting. Over 9 months, we're talking $26,000, $27,000 coming out of their pocket. These are numbers that those sellers need to know. If you list your house for too much, it could sit on the market for this amount of time. Here's how much it could cost you as it sits. But what takes this to the next level, you guys, my favorite part about this calculator is feature that we added down here in the bottom right. It's got this show price toggle. If I flip that show price toggle, it's going to throw a price on top of each of these bars that shows me what I would need to sell the house for to offset the cost of that house sitting on the market. So, for example, if we sold today, I'll draw your attention to that bar down there at the bottom that has all the numbers in it. If we sold today, right off the market, an investor buys it for 5.25, they're going to be walking with about $107,000. But if they had a 5.25 offer that they accept, maybe even a 5.30 or 5.40 offer that they accept in 6 months' time, they're not going to be netting as much as this 5.25 offer today. In fact, let's look at these numbers. If the house sits on the market for 6 months, it's going to, accrue that 17 grand of holding costs. So if they still wanted to net about 107, 110, we would need to sell the house for 542 at that point for them to net that much. And it only gets worse from there, you guys. If the house sits for 9 months, if you still want to net that 110, we'd have to, sell the house for 550 at that point. Do you think that house is going to appreciate 5% over the next 9 months? If the house sits for 12 months, we'd have to sell it for 560 for you to net that 110. This is a way for you to have that conversation about, hey, what do you really care about? Do you care about getting that 5.25 price point, or do you care about netting 110? And if you do care about netting the most, we're going to have to sell this thing faster, or else we'll have to sell it for more later on down the road for you to net that 110. So again, it's just a powerful conversation for us to have with our sellers and talk about something they're not thinking about. The cost of that house sitting on the market, sometimes they'll say something like, oh, I want to sell it for 5.25. I don't care how long it takes. Do you really not care? If it's taking 30 grand out of your net, you're going to net 30 grand less. Would you care then? We need to be able to have this conversation with our clients and talk about, Billy, I'm so glad that you like this one. This one's a game changer for these pricing conversations. Like I said, we're going into these listing conversations right now, having to battle that homeowner who wants to list it way up here. This is the type of tool that really gives us something in our arsenal to go into that conversation and really talk about something they're not thinking about. We're the expert in this conversation with that seller. We need to show them some collateral that really illustrates that. And this is the type of tool that'll help you do that. All right, so that's the basic calculator, the holding cost conversation. We need to be able to have these conversations with our sellers. But once we're able to have that conversation, that holding cost conversation, and illustrate, how long the house is sitting on the market, that plays into how much you're netting because of these costs that are building up over time. And once you can have that type of conversation with your client, I urge you to then move on and check out this true value analysis calculator. This is our most popular calculator. It is our newest calculator. It's the one that we released where Tom Ferry said, hey, that's the best calculator you guys have ever created. And we've created over 40 calculators. That's saying a lot, but I think the reason why he said it was the best is because of how timely it is. As you guys know, right now we're going into these conversations with these sellers, and we really got to be able to ace that conversation about pricing. This is the type of tool that's going to help you do that. We're calling it our new net sheet, and you still get to run a net sheet with it, but instead of running just one net sheet, you're going to get to run 3 net sheets. And this is something a lot of you guys on the call today, you're rock stars, you're already running multiple scenarios, a high-end scenario and a low-end scenario for your sellers. But this lets you run those 3 nets at once. You get to say, hey, market value, I've looked at the comps in the area. I think your house is worth 5.25. That's what I recommend we list it at. But I also want to show you what could happen if we listed at 500,000. There's not another house in this neighborhood priced that low. It's an aggressive strategy, but we might be able to get a bidding war going. And it's going to fly right off the market. I can promise you that. So I'm going to show you that 5.25. I also want to show you a 500. And you know what, Mr. Seller, you want me to list it at 550. Let's look at a 550 as well. I think it's too high for this neighborhood. It'll sit on the market for longer than it needs to, but let's look at how the numbers shake out. And so we get to run 3 net sheets at once, then talk about that holding cost aspect, time on market, how much this house is costing you as it sits on the market. And then the kicker of it, you guys, if it sits on the market for too long, we're probably going to end up having to do a price reduction. And so how does that reduction and those holding costs play into the net on all 3 pricing strategies? That's true value analysis in a nutshell. And so let's open it up and let's take a look. So we open it up. We're going to use those same numbers. So Mr. Seller, after looking at the comps in the area, I'm going to recommend that we list it at 5.25. But I also want to show you that price it to sell it price. If we price it at 500,000, everybody and their mom is going to come look at this. The open house is going to be packed. This is going to fly right off the market at 500,000. And then the other side of the spectrum, you want me to list it at 550. Let's look at the numbers at 550 again. I think it's too high for this neighborhood, but let's see how the numbers shake out. And then again, this is one of those seller calculators. So we can add the address, have it pull some of that data for us. This is that seller's tax record right here. So I'm going to use that tax amount for them. The interest rate, this is that homeowner's loan. Let's plug in that 2.9 interest rate and then use that loan balance. So we're using that seller's, that homeowner's actual information in our calculator here. And then again, like I said earlier, this calculator builds on that holding cost concept. So we have to plug in all the holding costs here. Let's go in and say, hey, you're paying that HOA, you're paying the electricity, the gas. Again, I'm going to plug in all these things that homeowner's paying that they're not thinking about. Again, the more, the better. The more stuff that we can load in here just to remind them of how much it's costing as that house sits on the market. So I'm going to put all this stuff in here. Then I'm going to hit that compute button down there at the bottom, and then let's look at our true value analysis comparison here. This is where it gives us that 3-tiered pricing strategy look right here. We've got the low end at 500. It flies right off the market in 1 month. The market value, we priced it at 5.25. It might, be on the market for 2 months, but it's still going to sell fairly fast. 60 days on market is not too long in today's market if you look at average days on market. And then the high end, if we price this thing too high at that 550, it could sit on the market for 6 months. Now, there are pluses and minuses. You can adjust those as needed, but let's look at those defaulted timeframes. With the holding costs in all three of those timeframes, this is what their final net would be. So on that low end, they could walk with 81,000. On the market value, they'd end up walking with about 101 if the house sits for 2 months. And then, of course, the high end, if that house ends up sitting on the market for 6 months, they could end up walking with 113 listing at that high. And this already is an interesting conversation because you'd think that selling it for 25,000 more, you'd net 25,000 more. But if you think about how likely it is for that home to sit on the market for longer, it's really only going to translate to like 12,000 more that you're netting on that higher price point. But the real important piece to talk about in this situation is that if that house does sit for 6 months, chances are we're going to do a price reduction. And so there's actually a toggle on here to do reductions. I flip that toggle, it throws a section down below where it shows me a reduction amount and how the numbers look after a reduction. Now, you can adjust the reductions amount. As you can see, we've got 0, 5%, and 10%. I do have agents who are like, hey, that market value, I think that's the right price for it. I don't think they're going to have to do a reduction. So let's change that to a 0. It's just going to take a little bit longer to sell. Instead of 1 month, it's going to take 2 months if we price it at this 5.25. But we're not going to have to do a price reduction. I did the research. This is what I think we need to list the house for. So you can adjust those as needed, but look at how the numbers shake out, you guys. They would be better off listing it on the low end. It flies right off the market, very little holding costs, possibly even a bidding war. But even if they don't get a bidding war, they're still walking with 81,000, as opposed to what you want to do, Mr. Seller, list it on the high end. Then it sits on the market for 6 months, gives you 6 months of headaches, showings, open houses, 17 grand that comes out of your pocket in those holding costs. And then you end up having to do a price reduction, and ultimately you're just walking with 58,000 bucks. We might be better off listing it on the low end. This is a really interesting conversation. I guarantee you, if you go into that listing appointment with that seller who wants to list the house a little bit too high, and you show up with some calculation like this, you're going to get them second thinking, thinking again about that list price that they have. But if you want to take it to the next level, jump to the market stats tab. If we jump to the market stats tab, it's actually going to use that address that I plugged in earlier, and it's going to pull me some data about that address specifically. So this is Grapevine, Texas. This is Alto's data pulled live, and a few of the metrics that really stand out to me most, you guys, average days on market, 118 days. That really supports me in this conversation with this seller. I want to sell your house fast, Mr. Seller. If we don't price this thing correctly, it could sit on the market for a while. In fact, the average for this city, that we live in, that we're selling your house in, is about 118 days. Mr. Seller, I want to sell your house a lot faster than that. If we don't price it correctly, it could sit on the market for about 120 days. Average in this city is about 118 days. Another piece that really, really helps in this conversation, you guys, is the percent of listings that took a price decrease. 40%. Almost 1 in every 2 listings in this city had to take a price decrease. If we don't price this thing correctly, Mr. Seller, it's realistic that we would have to do a price reduction. In fact, 40%, 1 in almost every 2 listings in this city had to do a reduction. We got to price it right out the gate. So this market stats tab just gives you the supporting data to really help you in that conversation. Now, if you're ready to go to that meeting with that seller, now that you've seen this calculator, let me show you the report that we have for it. I'm going to press the share icon in the top right corner, and we've got the full report. I'm going to skip that. The TVA report actually includes the full report in it. So I'm just going to jump into the TVA report, and I'll show you where that full report is. But I'll click on TVA report, and it's going to build me this 5-page packet that I can take to that listing appointment, that pricing conversation, and really look like a pro. It's got a branded cover sheet, all my information on there, true value analysis report. I scroll down and it shows this amazing graphic. We're all familiar with it. If we want to get you the most, we got to sell the house in the early stages. The longer the house is on the market, the more buyers start thinking something's wrong with it. They start submitting lowball offers. We tend to do price reductions if a house sits on the market for too long. It's not like it sits on the market for 6 months and we're like, hey, let's adjust the price up and try to get more people to buy it. You adjust it down. And if it sits another 6 months, you adjust it down again. That's just how it goes. If we want to get this thing sold and get you the most in your pocket, we got to sell it in the early stages. Then there's the market data to support that, the local data, the national data. The next page actually shows those holding costs. Here's how much it's going to cost us if it sits 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Here's how much it's costing you. Then it goes to that true value report that I was mentioning, you guys. So this single page is the full report, but it's that 3-tiered pricing strategy glance here. It shows the low end, the market, the high end. It shows the holding costs in orange, reductions in red, showing their adjusted final net in green in all 3. And then it ends off, you guys, with the net sheet. So that's why we call it our new net sheet. It lets us create that great looking net sheet that everybody loves our app for. But we get 4 additional pages of really awesome educational material for us to go into that pricing conversation and really look like a pro. So if you've got a listing, I urge you to work one of these up and take it into that next conversation with your client. This will really help you in that pricing conversation. So absolutely one that I had to cover with you guys. Now, there's a ton of additional calculators. We try to hold these these calls to really help you with what costs. So the holding costs on that report are just based on 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. But there are probably other report styles available in there that do let you look at that cost on the monthly basis as well. But the default for that report is going to Billy has a question about this working on land. So we do have agents that creatively use this for land deals. But traditionally the app is built for existing residential to Billy. However, if you can go in there, you can adjust your fees on your calculator. So you can go in there and put certain fee changes that do make this work with new constructions, land deals. But it at its core is built for existing residential, to Billy's question there. All right, so we've got a lot of calculators. I encourage you guys to join us on our next advanced call where, we'll be cherry picking calculators that work better for you in that market. Next month, we'll see what January has in store for us. But now I need to go over to the last piece of this for our advanced call. I'm going to jump to premium and I'm going to talk about this December monthly marketing package. For those of you who don't know what premium is the optional subscription portion of your app. It's that premium tab. It costs 99 cents a month, or if you want to pay for the full year, it's $9.99. And, it's going to unlock this massive social media content library with thousands of pieces that are designed to help you in the most relevant and the most trending talking points and the conversations that you're out there having with your clients today. And so what does that entail for the month of December? I know we're at the end of December, but we've got some really cool content that's still relevant. So first, is waiting for a lower rate worth it? This is such a powerful piece for you to post on your socials, you guys. A lot of these buyers, they're waiting for a specific rate. They're like, oh, if rates dip below 6, I'm in, I'll buy. Or if they dip to 5 3/4, I'd buy at that point. Well, here we can look at how much in savings that actually would be for them. So, for those people that are trying to wait for the rates to dip down to 6 before they're willing to enter the market, that's 80 grand in this 550 scenario that shows an example here. That's $80 in savings that's keeping you out of buying the home. Again, pair that with that conversation that we started with, the potential for buy downs. You could actually get a concession and buy the rate down a 1/4 point yourself and save that $80 with a concession from that seller. Rather than waiting, 6 months to wait and hope that the rates come down, and then you're saving $80. Get that concession from that seller. Buy today, get the home for the right price, get that concession from that seller, and buy down the rate yourself. Buy that 1/4 point down yourself right now on the seller's dime. So just an interesting conversation piece for you to post to social media and talk about, what they are actually waiting for. They're waiting for that lower rate, but why? How much are you actually looking to save waiting for that lower rate? And as you know, with all of our infographics, they're actually tied to our calculator. So I'll go ahead and open this one up. It's showing that example scenario of 550 on here. But what if I work with clients in that 250 price range? Or out in California, if we've got any of those California folks on the call today, what about $1 million price point? The numbers change a lot. So let's press continue. And let's change this price point. Let's say, hey, I'm working with a buyer that's looking in that 3 1/4 price range. Let's plug that in. 10% down conventional on 3 1/4, hit compute. Now we're talking about even less savings that they're waiting for. They were telling me they were waiting for them to drop to 6.125. So wait, you're holding out for $25 in savings a month? That's what's keeping you from being a home buyer, is $25 a month. For those who are waiting for rates to touch 6 before they're willing to buy, you're waiting for $47 a month. I don't know. Let's just look at how the numbers shake out. So this is a really interesting piece that really breaks down, the pain point. We want the savings. We want the lower rate, but how much savings does that really mean? And then it opens up the door to opportunity of conversations on, hey, there's other ways to get that savings right now. So very cool piece. That was the first piece that we highlighted in our December monthly marketing package. Let's open that December monthly marketing package up and look at the second piece that we highlighted. So second piece being highlighted for December. This is a very polarizing topic, but a really powerful one for us to talk about on social media just to keep our thumb on the pulse. I know you guys have seen the 50-year, or talk about 50 years. It's not actually a real loan yet. If it is, we'll add that to our calculators for sure. But the conversation around a 50 is really interesting right now. It's very polarizing on social media, but it's very trending on social media. The president said it, so people are talking about it in our industry. And this is a way for you to talk about it as well. Because, it's interesting when you think about the fact that homeowners don't tend to live in the home for the full term length anyway. So this 50-year, what if we look at the numbers after just 10 years, because that's about the average on how long homeowners live in the home anyway. Same goes for a 30. Homeowners don't live in the house for the full 30 years a lot of times. They live in the house for 10 years, then they refinance, upgrade, do something, switch to a different home. And so if we look at how the numbers shake out for that 50-year after just 10 years, it's comparable to how the numbers look after 10 years on that 30-year. And the interesting thing about the talk about the 50-year and possibly it being added is that a lot of people are demonizing it, but they're demonizing it for the same reasons that you should demonize the 30 when you compare it to the 15. You know, the amount of interest that you pay, it's better if you don't want to pay as much interest to go with the 15. But if this 50 does get offered, it's a way for us to, you know, possibly expand our affordability. That might jump that buyer up into another tier of home, get that extra bedroom, get that extra bathroom that they're looking for. And so it's an interesting talking point in today's market just because it's so trendy. But this is a really cool piece. Again, it's tied to our calculators. You can adjust the example scenario to work with the purchase price that really resonates with your audience. But it's a really powerful way for you to just unbiasedly step back and say, hey, here's what the numbers say. And here's how much equity, how much interest you would pay over 5 years. You know, it's interesting just to look at the numbers. And then you can even do something creative with it, like post it to your story and put a poll sticker on there. Do you think that a 50-year is a good or bad thing? You know, just an interesting way to engage with your audience. So really powerful tool there. I see we've got a question for Lori. Okay. Well, on that, you have to, the true value analysis, you have to plug in all 3 price points to actually get the market report. So that calculator on its own is about all 3. But, you know, that's, Chris, can you write that down as a note? You know, some of that data that we're pulling, it would be good to pull that without having to do a full true value analysis and talk about 3 different price points and just be able to pull some of that Altos data on its own for a listing. So I've got Chris taking that note down and we'll see what we can throw together. Thank you, Lori, for asking that. All right, so we talked about the 50-year mortgage infographic. The next thing that we highlighted in our monthly marketing package, you guys, is a piece that talks about how mortgage applications just hit a 2-year high. And this is really important news for a couple of different reasons. And, you know, in the infographic that we've loaded in here, it's actually a swipeable. I'll go ahead and open it up for you. So this is multiple pieces. In the top right corner, you can see that it's actually 5 pieces to this set. But if I scroll through, it has the headline, but then it shows, a summary, but then it shows the benefits for buyers and for sellers. And this is a really important piece of this because, typically it's the first signal to a lot of things happening. If you see a influx in mortgage applications, that means more buyers are getting ready to enter the market. And that signals, different market dynamics coming. And so a 2-year surge in mortgage applications actually means a lot for our industry and the real estate market as a whole. And so this is a really cool piece for us to educate our followers and just show that we're staying on top of all things real estate that's trending and important and newsworthy, because again, for buyers, this surge in mortgage applications means that there's more people entering the market. So you're going to have more competition, if you're thinking about buying, you're thinking about holding off, this is the first signal that you're going to have more competition in the coming months. And you might see more multiple offers and you needing to outbid somebody in 3 months' time. And so, it's a way to instill urgency with some of our buyers and say, hey, let's get you to purchase this home now before, there's more buyer competition in the coming months. And then of course for sellers, it's of course the benefits for them. If they're thinking about selling, this could signal a great time for them to actually get their home listed and pull the trigger on that process. This shows an influx of buyers entering the market, and there's opportunity if you've been on the fence and thinking about should we sell our home, it could be a good time for you to think about pulling that trigger and getting your home listed. If you're wanting to sell, influx of mortgage applications means that there's more buyers coming in the coming months, and a real powerful way for you to time the sale of your home more accurately. So that is a great piece we had to highlight. The last piece that we highlighted in the monthly marketing package is actually a bundle of content. So it's not just one piece. It is actually a bundle of 25 different holiday filters for you guys to use. And so timely and important for this week specifically, I urge you guys to get out there, record some videos, take some photos with these fun holiday themed filters. You know, oh snap, I found the perfect listing for you. Just a way for you to post some fun stuff, take that quick picture of that listing that you're trying to market, take pictures of you and the coworkers working that fundraising event or that holiday party, you know, taking a picture of you and the team. You know, it's an easy way for you to snap a quick photo or record a video with one of these fun real estate themed frames. You know, a lot of really fun ones in here for you guys to use. I urge you to go in there and take a quick photo today. You know, make it it's a simple thing that you can do over the next 3 days to help you get some visibility for your business. Just post a quick photo. You know, a real simple way to make your post for the day. So, all right, so that is your monthly marketing package for December. As you know, we do have the January one coming up. Again, happy holidays to everybody who was able to join us today. I believe I answered all the questions that came in, but if there's any last ones, feel free to type that in. Or if I didn't get a chance to get to yours, you can retype that in. But definitely want to thank you guys for joining us on this holiday week and getting to follow along while we went through this month's advanced class. Hope that this gives you a lot of useful stuff that you can use through the holiday season, and I look forward to meeting with you guys next month on the January advanced call. Awesome. All right, you guys have a wonderful holiday season and take care.